This demonstration video is going to be solely based on smoothing things out. This is one of the most important things with ceramics. Unless intentionally needing it to have a texture, most things should be smooth. So we're going to talk a little bit about smoothing them out, and then also when you're slipping and scoring things together, ways you can smooth out adding things together. So the biggest thing that I see is normally just like nail marks or basically like accidents that nick into your piece, and students don't take the time to go back and smooth them out. So there are a few ways to handle that. You can always start with a little bit of water and your finger and just see if rubbing it out works. Sometimes it will, sometimes it doesn't. Like in this case, that's not really working. So you need a little bit more strength to it. You can use a spoon and rub the spoon in one direction. And again, that's going to give you a lot more strength because you're using plastic. One thing that's hard about a spoon, though, is sometimes you end up digging back into it, and so you have to be careful. That kind of happens with most techniques. It can actually backfire on you. You can also use a spoon and rub it in a circle, but again, you have to be careful not to catch the edge of the spoon. And this actually gives it a really soft look when it comes out of the kiln, so that can be really nice. I haven't gotten these areas because I want to show you another technique you can use, a metal rib, to smooth things out. So that gave it a lot of strength. Again, you're using the strength of the metal rib and pressing with the rib to smooth things out. You can also try a rubber rib. This generally does not have quite as much strength. So notice how it's taking a lot more time to go over, and it's really still not even getting that nick out right there. So I'm going to go back to one of my stronger ribs, and I mean that went out in one swipe. But as I'm smoothing this top part out, I do need to notice that now I'm starting to create some pretty, I would say, like rough or sharp edges. So I want to stop and take some time to go through and smooth those out with my finger as well. And again, this works for all things. This is pinch pots, this is slabs, this is coils. You really don't ever want sharp, gunky edges. You really want to smooth everything out. Edges are normally so easy to just touch it with the edge of your finger. And it just works really well to smooth that out. So now all those top edges at least have been smoothed out on this little rectangle. Another great option is a sponge. You can just get a little bit of water on a sponge. You don't want too much because you don't want to oversaturate, but you can just rub out the edges. One thing you'll notice with a sponge, though, is you are going to see some sponge lines. So right here you can see where I sponged it. This also tends to reveal the grog that's inside of your piece. So it might be difficult to see, but there are these little itty bitty, basically like tiny pieces of rock, super, super tiny, like sand almost. And the more I rub, the more those grog pieces are starting to surface as I'm rubbing with my sponge. So you want to be careful not to rub too much, but you know, that's another option for smoothing out, especially if your piece is kind of drying. So there's that. Another thing that happens a lot is students have a piece and then they kind of want to backtrack. They're like, well, you know, I wanted to do this carving design at first, but now I've changed my mind. And this can be really tricky because now there are these deep grooves in your piece, but you can actually get rid of these. I would suggest using a, this is called these are like teeth. So this would be like a scoring rib or a rib with teeth. And you'd actually kind of add some water to your piece to dampen the top, and then take your rib and score the top of the surface. And this looks crazy, but it actually helps just basically to add enough moisture to the top that it's going to smooth out really nicely for us. And then go back to one of these options that we talked about for smoothing. So your rubber rib, your metal rib, or your spoon. I'm going to try that rubber rib since I just added water to this. It's really malleable, and I'm now able to smooth that out really quite well. And then all of a sudden that design is gone. And again, I need to go back and consider my edges. I don't want to leave those edges wet and gunky. I want them to be soft and just a nice, subtle, round edge. So going back through and doing that for another example. So the last thing I'll show is here is just the natural canvas on clay after you roll. And then here's a piece of clay that I just kind of moved around the table. A lot of times the bottom of our pieces look like this, just natural wear and tear from taking them in and out of our bag. Always make sure you consider the bottom of your piece. Take time, go through, smooth it out real quick, whether that's just with your finger and some water or that's with a rib. These ribs can be located in the back of the classroom in the drawer that says ribs. It's to the right of sink 6. And then again, just touch those edges with my fingers. And now I've at least considered both sides of my slab. And then I would do the same thing to get that canvas texture out. Now, if you're adding 2 pieces together, this tends to create a new element. How do you smooth out inside between 2 pieces, like an edge like that? It's really hard to get your finger in there. It's really hard to get a rib in there to smooth that out. So if I were to slip and score this piece on, so I'm scoring really well so that I create a lot of slip. Slip is 50% water, 50% clay. It's nice and wet and sticky. And then if I'm going to slip and score it onto this smaller slab, and I really want to make sure that it's scored well. And I'm going to go ahead and take those 2 pieces, set them together, and press. And I'm going to see that there's going to be a ton of slip that's going to slip right out of the edge of that. And I need to address that. I need to smooth that out, because if I just leave that as is, again, it doesn't look good. I want to take the time to smooth it out. So if you're in one of these situations where you have this edge that you really can't get to with your finger, like I can kind of get there, but it still doesn't look very good, you can actually use a paintbrush. And granted, I would use a paintbrush with firm bristles, like firm paintbrush bristles, but you can go through and sort of just paint. And that's going to smooth that out really nicely. And this is so helpful with a lot of textures or design elements, because I can rub out like the sides of this, but that groove down at the base can be really tricky. And a lot of times if you go in with your rib, you end up causing more damage, and it's not always helpful. It's just a trickier angle. So definitely embrace paintbrushes as another form of smoothing out your piece. And there are also modeling tools that sometimes can help with smoothing. They're a little bit trickier. I'm not going to demonstrate that here because that's not really what they're for, but they're a plastic tool. And any plastic surface like this, just like a spoon, you can use that to smooth stuff out as long as you're being really careful. But that would be an example of slipping and scoring 2 pieces together and smoothing them out. Again, just so that once they're fired and they get bisked, they're not gunky or sharp or hard to work with. So that is an introduction to smoothing out different objects and different textures and mistakes in your clay.